next on the agenda will be our second and final fireside chat of the evening, moderated by Ireland's AI Ambassador, Soapbox Labs co-founder and formerly of this parish, Dr. Patricia Scanlon. So Patricia, would you please come up and set up the...
Yes, I can call everybody on there. Sorry. Oh, sorry, my glasses would help actually. I was wondering why everything. So I'd like to welcome onto the stage Delaram Golpayani, David Leslie, please, and Olga Cronin. So just so I get everybody. Sorry. So Delaram is a research assistant here at the ADAPT Research Centre in Trinity College Dublin, currently finishing her PhD studies. Olga is a senior policy officer of Enforce at the Irish Council for Civil Liberties. And sorry, on another page, we have David Leslie is Director of Ethics and Responsible Innovation Research at the Alan Turing Institute and a Professor of Ethics, Technology and Society at Queen Mary University of London. So thank you all for joining us. Thank you for the invite tonight. Really appreciate it. I'm very happy to be here. It's an amazing feat that you've achieved to have this lab. I mean, so often the resources in AI are constantly towards the innovation, bigger, faster, better, stronger. We need to beat Russia, China. We need to beat the robots. We need to beat everybody. And everybody goes, and then there's regulation, right? Yeah, and then we need regulation. But without any real thought for the work and the research that needs to go in to better advise how this regulation happens. A lot of the times the people who are drafting the policies and the regulation are not AI experts. They interact with the experts, but this is a technology that's evolving. It has evolved for decades. It's not just going to stop now and suddenly have, something. Every year there will be something new, and the regulation and the policy and the enforcement will have to change too. And having a research lab like this here to be able to be that policymakers and politicians and people can learn from and you can advise, not just here in Ireland but globally and across Europe, is really important. And it's just not that usual, and not in Ireland. I think this is one of the first bodies to be on its own to have this title. I've not seen it before, and I'm sure in other countries there are probably collaborators you can work with globally, but I think it's really important because we do talk so much about our AI strategy, our ethical AI. The EU AI Act is a feat. It's a very wordy feat, but it's something that was achieved, and the implementation of that regulation is really important. But to have this here now in Ireland is something that needs to be celebrated and supported. And it's fantastic. Your funders have done an amazing job. So I look forward to a lot more out of this. But thank you guys for joining me on stage. And what we're going to talk about a little bit is about the accountability research and policy, and how we get from there. So David, I might start with you if you don't mind. Actually, the term accountability, it's gained a lot of momentum, not just because of the policy, but in the context of AI over the past few years. So I suppose a good question would be, what are the gaps? What are we seeing now? We're talking about accountability. How easy is that to achieve now in terms of the vast, and particularly in the EU, the policy that's out there in regulation?
So I'm happy to answer that, but I cannot resist the opportunity just to congratulate Abeba and to say, so I've known Abeba for a few years now, from the very beginning, I think. And I'll say, there's no doubt that Abeba is a brilliant visionary in so many ways, as has been stated over and over again today. But I think that the other component we need to recognize is there's a generational talent that combines that brilliance with intellectual integrity. And so it's so rare today to move through the world with intellectual passion and intellectual integrity to be driven to make a social difference. And so I just want to flag that up. In terms of accountability gaps.
Yeah.
So I think we could even talk about accountability washing, actually.
Oh yeah, okay, go on.
when we really think about this. So, we have, if you kind of step back and look at the range of interventions in the governance kind of world, the spectrum of governance interventions, you have soft law, so you've got the various sort of standards and guidances. Then you've got regulation and harder law. And you'll see that, say, the past 5 to 10 years, there has been a huge amount of activity. You've got standards development in the so-called socio-technical fields. You've got a lot of standards development organizations working to build standards on fairness, standards on various elements of data security and safety and privacy. You've got also interventions in AI and AI-adjacent law. So for instance, data protection law has provisions for AI and even cybersecurity law. And then you've got broader kind of governance interventions that come from the kind of higher geopolitical international level. The most familiar one recently is all these AI summits and which have spurred these kind of AI safety institutes. So you've got a range of governance interventions.
Yeah.
But then just lift up the hood, right? Look at standard development organizations. Well, you say, well, that's great. We're establishing, right, vocabularies and mechanisms to enable self-regulation. But the question is, who populates these SDOs, right? It's the corporations. There are knowledge asymmetries that are created by the power of corporations to control digital data, compute, and skills infrastructures, which then enables them to primarily populate the standards development organizations and to set standards that are self-serving, right? That have democratic deficits, that set the parameters of vocabularies, right? So there you go for standards. Then you think about regulation, think about data protection law. There's no doubt that we need data protection law. We do need it. But then look at enforcement. Where do you see effective enforcement of data protection law nowadays, right? Think about what happened with the generative AI moment, right? Did anybody recognize that the Italian Data Protection Authority was the only data protection authority to call out the illegality, right? And the lack of data minimization, the lack of legitimate interest, all of the things that are clearly evidenced in the use of the kind of use of data in these unfathomable data sets that train these models. What happened?
They went very quiet.
Right, they went very quiet very quickly.
Yeah.
And so you have another instance you have lots of accountability for data protection law, but very little ultimate enforcement. Right. And then just one last point about the AI safety summits and the AI safety institutes. Sure, there's now a new vocabulary about assessment and evaluation of these large systems. And this, as in the previous panel they spoke about, this narrowing of safety in terms of technical understandings of how do you come up with the kind of right measurements for the technical performance of these systems. And so suddenly people felt a little more assured that safety was being taken care of.
Yeah.
But what happened? Well, actually that took the concentration, the governance concentration, away from the broader set of ecosystem level activities which were going on in terms of how big tech was acting, right? Which is, there was a rapid commercialization of systems that clearly raised societal level risks, that clearly advanced mechanisms of discrimination and cultural bias, stereotyping, et cetera. And all of those significant governance issues that we really need to pay attention to were kind of swept to the side because we have a bunch of safety institutes.
Yeah, okay.
And so we really need to be careful when we think about accountability because there are a lot of gaps.
Yes, it's like calling for regulation in the future when we have super intelligence as opposed to calling for regulation now.
As was said.
Okay, very good, Delarama, I just wanted to ask you a little bit more. Maybe you could we talk a lot about the EU AI Act, but maybe if you wouldn't mind just giving us a little brief overview of the Act and particularly around the guidelines around conformity assessment and human rights impact assessment, things like that, just so for people.
There's a crash course on the AI Act.
That'd be great.
In 3 minutes. So the AI Act is a new EU regulation which aims to protect citizens from harms of AI on three key areas of health, safety, and fundamental rights. It was published in July, so it's only 4 months old after like more than 3 years of negotiations. And in this 3 years, we've been working here in ADOPT on the building tools to help with the compliance with the AIAL, and this will be discussed in my Viva session just in 10 days. So no pressure. The AIAL adopts a risk-based approach, and this structure, there are systems that are prohibited to put into the EU market, for example, social scoring systems. There are other systems that are called high-risk AI systems, and these can be put into the EU market and can be used if they comply to a set of strict requirements, including risk management, documentation and transparency, human oversight, record keeping, and so on. And the process to make sure that these high-risk AI systems comply to the requirements is called conformity assessment. And depending on the type of the high-risk AI system, they might undergo self-assessment or third-party conformity assessment, which is conducted by competent notified bodies, or they also called conformity assessment bodies. But what are these types of high-risk AI systems? So the first type is what I call them Annex 1 high-risk AI systems, which are product or safety component of products that are already regulated in the EU, for example, toys, medical devices, machinery. So if you integrate AI into that, there are obligations for you, and there is the third-party conformity assessment for these systems. Type 2 is Annex 3, which is the list of specific applications, high-risk applications of AI in different domains that, many of them were mentioned in Abeba's speech. It was oh, that's high risk. So if it is used in border control, education, enforcement, these are high-risk areas. And all of them would go into that, undergo self-assessment, except the systems that are under biometric category. These systems also need to go to a third-party conformity assessment. And after that, you get the CE marking, which shows that you comply with the AIAL. So I have a bit of exercise for you, if you don't mind. So if you have an iPhone, if you go into the settings, if you go to general and then scroll down, you get the legal and regulatory, and you can see the CE marking in the EU. So, or if you have maybe a Samsung, it's not an advertisement, but you can see the CE marking on the phone. So it's not the AIAL compliance, of course, it's for the electronic devices. Then it shows that this product is safe to use, but the challenge with the AIAL is looking into the impact of AI on fundamental rights and how we're gonna assess and audit this.
Yeah, there's a lot of work.
Yeah, a lot of work.
And yeah.
But if I can add, this is not the end, because AI systems are evolving. So when you put it into the market under the Act, you need to have a post-market monitoring system. So you have to observe the.
And the models can change, right? They change with data. A lot of them are live, right? They're moving. So how does that work? I think there's a lot more to figure out on that. Olga, if I could bring you in and just ask you a little bit more about who are the main stakeholders in this accountability ecosystem?
For sure, and just maybe forgive me for a moment, I kind of just want to return to a statement that we heard earlier from the Secretary General about Ireland possibly and Europe being seen as being too militant when it comes to certain laws compared to, let's say, China. But forgive me, Mr. Secretary General, but I suppose, we've been failing to enforce that law here in Ireland. And I think that this is one of the reasons why, from ICCL's perspective, we think Abeba's lab is so important, because it's a very shaky foundation to begin this new industrial revolution. And as we have the AI Act, it's absolutely not perfect. It still paves the way for the use of facial recognition technology. And so, just to make that point about enforcement of laws that we have in place that are supposed to protect us. But in terms of stakeholder engagement, I might tell a story, actually, if it's okay, to say how it shouldn't happen. And it's very parochial. It's just in regards to Ireland, and it is about facial recognition. There was an announcement in May 2022 by our Justice Minister to bring in facial recognition for the police. It was going to be real-time and retrospective, and the plan was to have it in by the end of the year. The AI Act wasn't even finalised at that stage. That was still being discussed. And we were told by the department that they would just unpick the law after the fact if it didn't align with the AI Act. There wasn't going to be any pre-legislative scrutiny. There wasn't going to be any stakeholder engagement. It was really, really troubling. But thankfully, we had people like Abeba getting into rooms with the Department of Justice, getting into rooms with politicians, and we essentially forced their hand to say, okay, we're not going to pass this by virtue of an amendment to a bill with no scrutiny, no democratic debate, no discussion, no public consultation. And, you know, they're still intent on bringing it in, but at least we were able to get into a room in the Oireachtas committee for 2 sessions, and experts like Abeba and many other experts as well were able to, you know, raise the concerns. So I'm kind of on a tangent, but those stakeholders are people like Abeba who can go under the hood, as you said, and extract and show and bring the evidence forward to show how there are issues, but also to highlight the downstream effects. Legal experts, civil society, but also the public. You know, this is something that we've been kind of calling for as well, is this idea that if you're going to bring in a system that's going to disproportionately affect a certain members of the community, they should be consulted. They haven't to date in Ireland, at least in this particular thing. So they're the main stakeholders. But I do think from the experience with working with Abeba on the FRT bill, if you like, it's been really valuable to ICCL to be able to work with several experts, Abeba and others, and combining our work together, you know, us being able to rely on their research, but also them being able to rely on us maybe to kind of surface it through the media and to politicians. And also because there's an education piece there with politicians. And I think by us working together, it's proven really impactful so far. So,
and to have a research, the background of an objection is founded in research is so much more powerful.
100%.
You know, rather than just, you know, this is what we think.
Exactly.
Right, yeah. I think that's going to be hugely valuable in what you're going to do here. Like, you know.
And actually, so I don't want to hog the conversation.
Yeah,
but
no,
there
please.
was an occasion where, you know, we were in the room with the Department of Justice and, you know, we asked the questions, well, what are you going to do about the discriminatory aspects of FRT? And we were told, there are none. And, you know, we had like the world's renowned expert on this issue in the room. Yeah, us bridging that gap, or bridging that kind of the distance between politicians and academia, I think is, we're just very grateful anyway.
Yeah, and we hope that the AI Council that Abeba also sits on is going to be part of that too, to help bridge that and have more voices and a range of expertise. So when there's arguments to be made, that we're making them from a very deep foundation.
Exactly.
Yeah, thank you. So David, when we talk about like, you know, these gaps between when you look under the hood, and I love that term, accountability washing. You know, what can we do? Like what needs to be done in order to stop that? You know, we're going to have a safety summit, so now you don't need to worry about it kind of attitude. You know, what are, particularly in the US, to be frank, like, you know, I mean, it's likely that the executive order gets rolled back, like, you know, on the AI safety. You know, what can we do here? We're doing something in Europe. If we stand alone and nobody else does it, that puts an awful lot of pressure on the system here.
I mean, what comes to mind are 2 things. I think first and foremost, we need to shift our focus from the kind of ex post interventions, right, which, you know, see the activity in the market and understand governance, right, as addressing harms already out there in the world. Sure. We need to move from that to what we would say is an anticipatory method, where you're putting affected communities and designers of the systems in the room together to really think out ahead of what are the potential impacts of the system. How do we anticipate the various ways that these systems can either do good or do harm in the world, and then take the step to transform innovation cultures to see themselves as socio-technical, which is to say, to go through each step of the design, deployment, and development lifecycle, and to sort of self-critically look at where are biases entering into this decision-making? How are we, not, regarding the views of a particular affected group in the way that we're designing this target variable? We need to sort of get into the guts of the innovation process and start thinking about these as social practices that at all times need to be thinking about the kind of ethical consequences.
Yeah, because it doesn't matter how the technology evolves, if you're concerned about the human at the center, it probably doesn't matter if the concerns around impact as opposed to how you got there.
Right, and I think that leads to the second point that I was going to make, which is if we see the technology as socio-technical, we need to see the role of community and more generally society as steering, having the hand on the tiller and steering the technology. I think what's happened with the path of innovation as it has developed with so-called frontier AI or generative AI large language models is instead of having a society-led approach to innovation, there's been a consolidation of technological and financial power and increasing centralization of the control of infrastructure that affects the public interest.
Yes.
So if you've got hyper-scaled technology that's affecting the public interest, how could you leave decisions about the direction of travel for that technology in the hands of the market, in the hands of private interests? So in terms of addressing that, my belief is we need to start thinking about certain elements of this technology as part of a more public utility.
Yeah.
I mean, if we think of the importance of the consequences of these scale technologies, we need to start thinking about participation in the technology as public involving.
Yeah.
And until we get to that point where you have a more direct line of engagement with affected populations, you're going to have a continuous strain of harms and consolidation.
Yeah, reactive regulation. Yeah. Della, I'm just go back to the assessment bit of it. What is the role of independent and third parties in terms of assessment? Is this the right avenue to go? We can't leave it to self-regulation. So,
Yeah, so when you have this self-assessment, it's not that you whether you are subject to that third-party conformity assessment or not, you need to have this internal control into the organization. But anytime the market surveillance authorities or other authorities that were mentioned, the 9 authorities in Ireland that are protecting the fundamental rights, might ask you about your compliance with the Act, might ask you for your documentation and compliance with the Act. So it's, but at the same time, I think that when you have citizens have the right to explanation, and also and also if a decision is made about them, they can ask why this was the result. And I think that also civil societies play a very important role in incident reporting and empowering the citizens. But a key thing is, that was mentioned, is AI literacy. It is an obligation under the AI Act, and it is not only for those who are interacting with the AI systems directly or even policymakers, but also I think for the public, it's very important to make sure that AI systems there are risks involved. I asked a question a few weeks ago in a classroom from students if they're happy if an AI system make a decision about their recruitment, and the people who talked and engaged, they were happy that an AI system is made because they think that it's fair. It's better. You don't make any first impressions. These systems are not biased.
Do they think a human would be more biased?
Yeah.
Okay. Wow. Yeah. That's an interesting take. And where did the data for the models come from? Olga, just when we're looking at the AI accountability research and policy, what and how do you think the role of civil society groups for meaningful accountability can come in?
So I think, as you mentioned, it's that incident reporting and bringing the stories from the public back up through to regulators, to councils, to oversight bodies that are involved, to politicians. I think the kind of ecosystem of the public, civil society, regulators, statutory bodies that are there to, protect fundamental rights, and then into politicians and to government, that we all have to keep keeping each other to account, holding each other to account. So the public, by and large, have to keep civil society to account, to be responsive and to be in, part of that education piece, but also keeping that discussion going. Civil society has to keep regulators to account. Regulators have to keep government to account. And all the oversight bodies that are given these powers or given these positions have to be given the independence and the power then to keep them to account. And I think that's the kind of ecosystem I think that we want.
Yeah.
And especially when something continues to evolve and then new research evolves, new harms become apparent, that system should be in place and should, be effective then in trying to mitigate against them.
Yeah, 100%. I'm not sure what time we have now. Okay, thank you. I don't have my watch on me. But okay, thank you very much to everybody involved. I mean, I think, what I'm getting from this, and I think we're beginning to realize more and more in the discourse about AI, it's very polarized. It's not so much politicized at the moment, but it's polarized. And you're either an AI enthusiast, which tends to mean you think we need to innovate at all costs. It tends to mean regulation's going to slow us down from something. Russia and China are going to win. If we don't, or you're being conservative, you're being safe, and you're going to slow it down. And it just tends to be that you can't have, the conversation tends to, for a lot of people, and I've heard this repeatedly, it's almost as if you can't have innovation if you have regulation. And that, we really need to stop that discourse. I mean, if you look at fintech, you look at medtech, biotech, these are very regulated spaces that have always innovated, cutting edge research all the time. And I will get this figure, but what I understand now is that the number of high-risk companies in Ireland is actually really low, right? Because there's not so many people. People say, oh, Ireland's going to slow down, Europe's going to slow down. Well, actually, the number of companies that are building technology that will actually affect a human's life, in some ways, and probably more so in the public service. But it's not like every single company is going to fall under a high-risk use case. People almost think if you're using AI, therefore you're going to fall foul of the regulation, slow everything down. And that narrative is helping people who want to push against regulation, because it's almost as if we're going to lose if we do this. And that is really not true. And I think that argument needs to be, if you hear it from anybody again, you really need to dig into it a little bit more. Is that really true? What does need to happen is good regulation, resourced regulation. Don't try and regulate and then limit the funding for it and then throw your hands up when there's bottlenecks and people complaining, because that's a classic chance for people to push back against the regulation. We need to, if we're going to do this and for the benefit of society, because right now you tend just to hear about the benefits of the technology, of what it can do and where it's all going to land and where the profits are going to go. And that's great. And it's only going to be good, which is great. It will be good, but it won't be good if it doesn't benefit society. We're the ones who need to push back here a little bit more. But when the market's been flooded with that narrative that regulation kills innovation. And I think that is a really problematic one that we need to deal with. And that's a marketing issue almost at this point, but it's a very effective one. And no doubt we can imagine there's a lot of people lobbying for that to be the narrative. Again, all eyes on the lab, right? And helping to amplify the message as well is really important. So thanks you to the panel. That was great, really informative. And thanks for the invitation today.